My name's David States. I was at EMBL from, I believe, 93 to 96, 97, sometime around there. I live in Santa Cruz, California, and have done so for the last 20 years since I left Heidelberg.
David, it's great to see you again. I well remember you from my own time at EMBL. And I think you also have the honor of being EMBL's first official communications officer. Is that correct?
That's true. And there's a funny story behind that because they weren't really even sure that that's what they wanted to do when they hired me. And when I was first hired, I was given 6-week contracts, and they would see if they still wanted to do it after that. And that went on for about 6 months before I got a full contract at EMBL. And then at that point really became the communications officer. I was really hired to write a history of the Institute for its 20th anniversary, the 20 Years On magazine that you well know.
That's right. I have a copy here, and I have been enjoying rereading it and seeing some of the photographs of colleagues looking much younger than they have been doing recently. So how did you first hear about EMBL, or how were you hired to do this job?
Well, hearing about EMBL and being hired were two different things. I came to Heidelberg because my wife at the time was doing a postdoc with Eric Carsanti in cell biology. And I came, and for the first year, I was doing the husband business at home, taking care of our 2 small children. But Patricia Kahn, who was working for the data bank at that time, had somehow come into conversation with Fotis Kafadas. They were talking about having a history written for the 20th anniversary, and we were friends from living close by, and she knew that I was a writer, and so she arranged an interview with me and Fotis, and then I was hired on that 6-week initial contract. But it turned out well, although it took a lot longer to write the history than any of us anticipated. It was really intriguing, and so I was kept on, and so I'm actually quite proud of the work that I did on that. The whole reason for writing the history was to create a positive image of the Institute, very much for the delegates that were on the council, because at least in my experience at that point, support for the Institute was not, I wouldn't say iffy, but you always had to cultivate that sense of the importance of the Institute. And the 20 Years On history really was to show and demonstrate to the council, as well as leaders, international leaders in the member countries, that this was a viable and important institute for the continent.
Yeah, I mean, I think the commitment in terms of effort, political capital and will, and sheer cost of setting up something like EMBL. I mean, they had just conducted a 20-year experiment, and it was reasonable to look at the data from the 20-year experiment and say, what was it good? I think that's an argument that has to be made regularly, just to appreciate what the value and understand what the value of this investment is.
Yeah, I think I have to give credit to Fotis. I mean, it was really his vision to come in and do that. I mean, he hired me to do that. So it wasn't that I walked into his office and said, you folks have to do this. It was his guiding principle. And I have to say there was some resistance at the beginning when I was hired to do this. One scientist actually point blank told me that we'd be better off not doing anything like this and keeping a very low profile, because if we keep a low profile, we'll keep being able to do what we're doing, which is just working out fine for us. And so
it's interesting. I mean, personally, I would not take that view. In fact, I would think it was very dangerous for the reasons you just mentioned, that if you don't really publicize the value of what you've been doing, there's always a risk that the well of funding will dry up.
Yeah, and I agree with you completely on that. But you have to, I think it's important to understand that Fotis had come from Harvard and I was an American. And I think there was a little bit of
I know.
concern about whether we were importing these sort of crass American kind of policies for publicity and things like that. And it took actually doing the history and for people to see it when it was done to say, okay, this is okay. And this is something that we want.
And science, is a battle of ideas. It's not like everyone initially always agrees on everything, and that's a good thing because it allows you to challenge the orthodoxy, look at a problem from different angles, and then hopefully in the end, reality and data will show what's true, and the truth will win out. But
no, I think that's a really important point because the flip side of collaboration is challenging one another and one another's principles and paradigms. And if you don't do that, you don't move forward because you get stuck in these old ways of looking at things. And the whole part that I really came to really respect the scientists that I knew was their ability to stop and say, well, we have to test these ideas and make sure that our theories or our principles are really viable. And when we find anomalous data, be willing to say, hey, this isn't working. We have to look somewhere else. And I think even writing that whole thing was somehow wrapped up in that whole process of you have to prove that this is going to work,
Yeah, and see, as I say, see how did the experiment work out. And I guess with this document for the first 20 years, I was thinking that really you had to tell not just one story, but several different stories. There's almost the origin myth of how did EMBL start and what was the raison d'etre for starting it, and then what was the reality that really persuaded the member states to contribute to it and grow it. Then, as you said, there's the story about the science. In other words, what have the people over 20 years done with the funding they've had and with their lives? What have they achieved? What have we learned? How has it changed the way we think about biology, about reality? What have we learned? And then the third part of the story, in my mind, is science at the moment isn't done by robots, it's done by people. And so even although there's a lot of jargon and there's a barrier to communication with non-scientists because of the speciality and some of the technical abstract notions that most people aren't familiar with the vocabulary, but actually it's people who are doing it. And so you have a whole interplay, just as you would have in almost any other human situation, of people with different views who maybe have conflicts or differences of opinions. So you have a whole network of different stories. And I'd love to hear how you approached learning about these stories. Was it just done by interviewing the leading contenders, or how did you go about this task?
I mean, of course, I had to do a lot of research, and my background wasn't in biology, so I really had to learn a lot as I was going along. And I read a lot of people's who I was focusing on their scientific papers and things like that. But of course, very intentionally, the human side of the story was melded with that because I thought that's what made it interesting, is how these scientists went about making the discoveries they did. But from my mind, making those stories viable meant that when I may have written at a level that you wouldn't see in a scientific journal, but the scientists who did that work still had to respect what I was saying and says, okay, that's a simplification, but it's still accurate.
Yeah.
So I made very, very sure and was very careful that I worked with the scientists and had them read what I was writing so that they could correct mistakes that I made or misunderstandings and look at it and say, yeah, that's good. or just the opposite, say, I think you misunderstood this, and then I'd go back and rework it. And I think that's sort of, I don't think that was dishonest. I think that that was really the way that you have to approach the stuff, because the last thing you want to do is embarrass a scientist and say, man, this person is writing this PR piece, but they fundamentally misunderstood what we're doing.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think for both the public and the delegates and people like that, one needed to write a story that was true to the science, but at the same time made it interesting. So that was my goal in any event.
And intelligible. And did you find, I expect you found some of the staff much better at communicating this than others.
Yeah, I think there's always that element. There are some people that really have an ability to step out of their own world and see the bigger picture. I think I had a lot of interviews with Kai Simons, and I think, though he was a little bit skeptical at the beginning, he really made an effort to made that very important story about the development of cell trafficking and cell biology, the development of cell biology at EMBL, clear and a holistic story, because that really combined a whole bunch of different people's work, not just his work. And even people like Ernst Stelzer, who was a microscopist, I think he really took a lot of time to explain to me very difficult, for me anyways, very difficult technical concepts. And but I had a lot of help. And there were a lot of, Christian Boulin was just amazingly sympathetic and helpful for me when sometimes I just felt completely lost, and he would say, okay, just take it easy. Let's go through this. And of course, Fotis was, I think, probably the most supportive to me. But then I remember writing the story about Janni Nusslein-Voller and Eric Fischhaus, and their work was really important. But I'd been warned that this was going to be a difficult story because she had a difficult leaving from EMBL, because frankly, John Kendrew had not, he was a structural biologist, and this was a very new field, and he didn't understand it and didn't value it. You can say that in retrospect properly. But actually, she was really wonderful. And I just was amazed what an open and bright, engaging person she was. She wasn't difficult by any means. In fact, even her time at EMBL, she remarked about, if perhaps Kendrew or the leaders at that time had really understood exactly what she was doing, she might not have had the freedom to do what she would do. Basically, she and Eric Fischhaus were left alone to really explore this entirely new world, and I think she really valued that opportunity. Whether the ending of her career at EMBL politically was what she had wanted or not, it enabled her to do her work, and her career has gone on and blossomed, and she's, so
of course,
I think
with the Nobel Prize, and in a way, for me, I mean, that was before my time arriving at EMBL, but I think you have to remember that very often a real understanding of just how important or not any piece of work is best judged retrospectively with with 2020 vision, looking backwards through the eyes of history. And in fairness to any Director General, Philipson or Kendrew or anybody else, who current, past or present, you can only make your best effort to judge things with the information available to you, and history may or may not prove you to be correct. But the idea that someone could work and be given an opportunity with great funding, great colleagues, great opportunities to do something very innovative and then take it with you, because that idea as well, that not everyone is supposed to stay their whole career at EMBL, but rather move on. It doesn't seem like a bad ending to the story.
No, and quite the contrary. And I think it plays into this very important concept of when EMBL was created. At the time, and I mean, I've been gone for 20 years, so almost 25. And so I can't speak to how much the European academic situations in different member countries have changed. But at the time, a lot of European universities had reputations for hierarchies that didn't allow junior faculty to really be creative, because they were really working for a grand master in their department or whatever. And so this was one of Kendrew's and the founders' ideas, is they really wanted a place where younger people would have the independence to pursue new and innovative ideas and not be under the thumb of a senior professor or faculty member. And so that really worked out well. I mean, I think that's the reason that cell biology had so much success. And I think it's something that really stands out about EMBL, is they created this environment where young people were allowed to pursue their ideas independently without, a lot of restrictions. And just as really the original vision was, when those people left, they took back that approach to their home countries, and they've cultivated that there. And I think that's one of the most important contributions that EMBL has made over the 50 years. That's just my opinion.
One of the biggest contributions of EMBL, what a lot of it is about, is the importance of fundamental basic science. I mean, applied science, translation to the benefit of, starting companies or developing new medicines is a very important spin-off opportunity. I think one of the hardest things I feel to communicate clearly to our political masters or to the general public is the real importance of working on things where you don't know what you don't know. You don't know how to do things. It's much easier to explain to someone, I'm trying to cure cancer or some other disease, but trying to explain the importance of, answering some fundamental question. How does this gene work? And I don't know if it will turn out to be useful or not. But those are the discoveries that have really, many of them have ended up shaping whole new industries. CRISPR, the whole gene regulation field, our understanding of how a fruit fly develops can reveal fundamental truths that are relevant to understanding genetic disorders in humans. That's one of the real challenges. I wonder how you feel as a professional writer you can contribute to making that story clearer to the general public.
Well, I think in some ways, part of it is you have to address that very directly. Even before I came to EMBL, I had a mentor, Bruce Alberts. I don't know if you know.
Yes,
Bruce.
I do know Bruce.
He was my boss and at UCSF, and I had no idea who he was, but he inculcated the importance of basic science to me very early when I was really sort of first joining the discipline. And I've been working for, it's almost 40 years now that I'm retired now. I just retired a few years ago, but statistically, you can demonstrate that basic science leads to more sort of practical applications than the efforts that were immediately directed at trying to find some kind of quote unquote solution. I mean, it's just very clear. You can statistically demonstrate that. But I think it's also, I come back to this idea of personalizing the science. I think you tell that story, but you make scientists human beings for the general public. My experience as having somebody who come from outside of science and then really learning about the community is a fundamental misunderstanding of what scientists do and how they think. I think that the general public thinks them as this sort of aloof, sort of brainy people who don't understand the real world. And I think that's fundamentally false. I think the scientists, I know certainly the good ones, I mean, you're going to run into eccentric characters all the time, but you do that anywhere in life. I think the making the general public understand that scientists are not that different from the general public. They just look at the world in a certain way and they explore it in a certain way. And if you can express to the public why people are asking the questions they do and their curiosity, and then show what comes out of it, I think it really disarms this view of scientists as being this other kind of person. I think that's really, really important to turn scientists into human beings.
Thank you for being willing to pursue your ideas, even if they were not immediately popular with everybody. I think your contributions were incredibly valuable to EMBL, and I hope you remain, an active, engaged member of our alumni community, because you have got a great set of skills and information to share with people. And thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me today.
I would like to say one last thing, and I think this is important because I think it's one of the reasons EMBL was founded is I still have, even though some of my experiences were not optimal at EMBL, I still have friends from that time that are all over the world. And most of my best friends in life are still from that time. And I come to Europe quite regularly to visit with them. And I think that was the lasting, for me, value, is meeting all these very, very bright people that have gone on to do really great things in the world.